Story 1. It wasn't a misconception. I just didn't believe everything you see in the movies is real, and especially in Christmas movies, things are a bit exaggerated. I didn't believe people really had such extravagant Christmas lights in the suburbs. I was very wrong. America is passionate about their Christmas lights. Story 2. When I visited New York, not a single person said, "Hey, I'm walking here," or "What are you? Some kind of fool?" This was disappointing. Story 3. People in New York were rude. Compared to a typical German town, I felt as if I had fallen into a pot of honey. Everyone was incredibly nice and went out of their way to help me. When I was in a coffee shop, they always gave me extra items and spoke very friendly. When I wanted to buy a shirt for my niece at Macy's, they told me where I could find more trendy items for teenagers in other stores. People on the streets were smiling at me. It felt unreal. Once, I was mistakenly given an alcoholic drink at a restaurant. When I asked for a non-alcoholic option, they tried to comp my meal. I had to say repeatedly that everything was wonderful and, of course, I would pay and tip. They acted as if they needed to compensate me, but it was just the wrong drink. I was a bit afraid of New York and never cared much for big cities, but my 14 days there were wonderful. I just wanted to visit a friend studying there, but I really fell in love with the people and beauty of New York. Story 4. A Spanish family visited my home, and the first thing they wanted assurance about was that United States households didn't really have garbage disposals in their sinks. They thought it was a myth. I turned it on and they were astonished. Story 5. I used to work with people from Africa. They were shocked that not all Americans are millionaires. When I asked why they thought everyone was a millionaire, they explained that in movies, everyone is held for ransom for $1 million. There are no poor or homeless people depicted in films. It wasn't what they expected. Story 6. I had only seen the bus driver tapping the sign on the bus to indicate not to talk to him. In both my home country and where I live now, it's not a big deal. Enter the late 20-something woman. I had misjudged my layover in Chicago. 13 hours quickly became 4 without sleep, and I desperately needed to get from Soldier Field to something that would take me to the airport. I pleaded with the driver to drop me off at the red line, and he glared at me, telling me to go to the back. I tried counting the streets as the bus rolled on since my phone had run out of roaming and I was relying on the map in my backpack. I would get off whenever it felt close enough. I knew I had made a mistake. I had wasted time strolling through random neighborhoods to look at Orthodox churches. Now I was going to miss my flight. I shouldn't have believed that anyone in the United States would help another person. Negative thoughts about myself and Americans flooded my mind. Suddenly, the bus screeched to a halt. To the passenger who needs the red line, "Get off now." I scrambled off the bus after yelling a tearful thank you. I made my flight and returned home. People are people. We are all the same wherever we are. It amazed me that the driver actually stopped in the middle of his route to let me off, even though it was something I had experienced in both countries where I lived. Story 7. That Americans weren't friendly. I have rarely been treated better in another country. They are a kind group of people. Story 8. Americans often do not understand dry humor. We Brits tend to be somewhat snobbish, believing our deadpan wit is superior to the more direct humor found in US sitcoms. The Americans I had met in online calls were always upbeat and cheerful, sharing cheesy jokes. However, meeting them in person and witnessing their actual dry humor was surprising. They were genuinely funny. Story 9. I was shocked by the homeless population in San Francisco. It has one of the greatest concentrations of wealth, and yet people are living in tents and urinating in the streets. People walk by as if it is nothing. Story 10. Not my own, but something others I know think. Europeans often comment that Americans are very direct and find it strange to have casual conversations. However, being from the Middle East, I can say that we do the same. I felt more comfortable socially in the United States than in the United Kingdom. Story 11. That Americans were rude. Americans turned out to be the nicest people I've ever met. So much so that I moved to the United States and prefer their company over that of people from my native country. I am totally serious. Story 12. We had a foreign exchange student from Norway when I was in high school, and I asked her the same question. She said she thought we all looked like either Rick Ross or the Tiger King. Story 13. I was initially scared because I'm a South Asian Muslim, but I spent a month there in October, and people were very nice. I expected some unfriendliness based on media reports. I assume that those living or studying there have different experiences, as many of my relatives and friends live there and have shared their stories. However, everyone we met was kind, accommodating, and friendly. Story 14. I assumed everyone would be unfriendly and rude. I was in Texas, and everyone was so happy to meet me that I felt like a celebrity. It actually became annoying how everyone wanted to talk as if we were old friends. I thought, "Madam, I do not know you." Story 15. It's not really a misconception, but I was taken aback by the scale of everything. From the size of the land itself, the distances, the size of cities, parks, neighborhoods, the height and size of the buildings downtown in a few major cities, and the variety of products in supermarkets to the packaging sizes, the list goes on. Obviously, I knew it was to be expected, but seeing it with my own eyes was truly fascinating. In some ways, it helped me understand the American way of thinking and living a little more. One thing that didn't meet my expectations was the fresh produce in California. I thought everything would feel and taste amazing since it's grown locally in perfect weather conditions, but anything I bought was bland and tasteless. Story 16. I honestly can't believe I'm seeing a post on Reddit about Americans that isn't just completely criticizing us. Story 17. I thought people would be significantly heavier. I have been living in Washington, D.C. for nearly 9 months now, with occasional trips to Virginia, Maryland, New York City, Utah, Nevada, Arizona, Florida, South Carolina, South Dakota, and Minnesota. I have hardly seen anyone who is truly obese. The typical American I have encountered, I consider bulky. The ratios are similar, but they tend to be taller, wider, and heavier, not necessarily fat. I guess based on my personal experience, which is not as strong as comprehensive statistics, that the conversation is often about body mass index values slightly above 25, which is not that significant, is it? Story 18. I've been living in the United States for a year. I thought that Americans were crazy and extremely patriotic and also a bit dense. When I took the job, some of my friends told me, "What, are you serious? You're going to be surrounded by morons." Mind you, the only vision I had of Americans was through social media and political news. Americans are extremely nice and quite normal. I never had a bad interaction with a United States citizen. Everyone was very welcoming and friendly. On my first day at work, a guy I barely knew took me out for dinner and drinks with some of his friends. In my experience, Americans are not crazy patriotic zealots. They are quite normal and often dumbfounded by what is happening in this country. They are not stupid. They sometimes have the preconceived notion that everything in the world works the same way as in the United States. When I told people I didn't have a driver's license and would use public transportation in my home country because it was very good, most Americans I spoke to were surprised and sometimes shocked. I understand this. If I had been born in this country, I would have probably gotten a driver's license as soon as possible. Story 19. It's nice to see these comments and people realizing that Reddit isn't a valid depiction of the United States. Story 20. I genuinely believed everyone ate fast food for every meal. Then I visited and realized there are many people who are really into cooking, farmers markets, and healthy eating. Story 21. As an American, reading comments about how we were kinder than expected is truly heartwarming. It makes me realize that it's not so much the citizens who are the problem right now, but rather the people in power. There are many more wonderful individuals out there than we realize. They just aren't as vocal. Story 22. Each state is vastly different. Sometimes I felt like I was in different countries. I remember years ago visiting New York City and chatting with locals. I got the impression they didn't really care about the rest of the country. In Virginia, a tow truck driver refused to jump my Toyota because it wasn't American, but in Washington State, I didn't know anyone, and everyone was super friendly and accommodating. I find it difficult to generalize about the United States after traveling all over it. Story 23. The food. I'm French, and I thought everything would be awful, but I discovered the southern United States version of barbecue, and I have missed it since. I also discovered sweet potatoes there, and I eat them all the time now. Story 24. I'm American, but my wife is Taiwanese. We have been together for 11 years, and she still finds it odd how friendly people can be in stores, asking how you are doing. When I visited Taiwan, I understood the difference. People there are extremely friendly but will only help if you ask, as it is considered unusual to offer assistance randomly. For example, holding doors open for others is seen as good manners in America, while I only witnessed that a few times in Taiwan, and it was mostly for disabled individuals. She was also surprised by how loud conversations can be in public, yet people engage in genuine small talk with strangers. Additionally, she is amazed at how helpful people can be. Sometimes she thinks their willingness to help has shady motives, as she has always heard about how dangerous America is. The first time she went to throw the trash in our community dumpster while I was at work, she struggled, and someone driving by stopped to help her. She still perceives it as dangerous here, so she doesn't like going out alone, but she realizes it isn't as bad as she initially thought. However, Taiwan is the third safest country, so it still doesn't meet her standards. But then again, nothing ever does. Story 25. I was told that Americans were superficial and that their interest wasn't genuine. However, after traveling to the United States frequently in recent years, I've realized that Americans are actually kind, open, and genuinely interested in having conversations. Story 26. I moved from Germany to New York State. I never expected such breathtaking nature. No movie could have prepared me for this. I'm in love. I expected Americans to be like those portrayed in movies. Everyone seems to be fighting for their rights. To be honest, I have not felt a significant difference between Germans and most of the New Yorkers I have met here. The only difference is that they are very open-hearted and enjoy small talk. I love it. Story 27. I thought people in the United States all lived in good conditions, but the levels of poverty in cities like Portland, Seattle, Oakland, and New York were astonishing. Story 28. I am American, but my wife is Brazilian. When she first arrived here 7 years ago, she thought people would be smarter. In other countries, they are taught how great everything is here, how everyone lives in a large house, and that everyone is really smart because of the education system. It didn't take her long to realize that people are not necessarily smarter here compared to other parts of the world. Story 29. I was told you can't eat healthy in the United States. What I received were salad bowls with plenty of vegetables, proteins, and surprisingly little dressing for about $10 plus tax and tip in restaurants. Story 30. Just came back from New York. Everyone was very polite to us, and it was nice to observe how people interacted in shops. A kind man waiting for his bagel on his way to work even apologized to me for the weather. I'm from the UK, where manners are important. It was a lovely experience. Story 31. I thought for sure that the homelessness and addiction crises weren't that bad until I saw the encampments and people using drugs in the streets. I love the nature, though, and may come back to visit the national parks but will avoid the cities. Story 32. My wife is from the Philippines. She majored in hospitality management. Throughout her degree, they consistently referred to the best quality of service as American standards, implying that anything less would be unacceptable. Upon arriving here, she quickly realized that this was not true. Hospitality workers are often not respected, and many are uneducated and disrespectful in their roles. Now, whenever we encounter a negative customer experience, which seems to happen frequently, we jokingly refer to it as American standards. Story 33. Los Angeles has often been portrayed as a crime-ridden place where one might fear being shot or mugged while walking down the street. However, it turned out that in the valley, people were quite nice, and I felt safe, despite the constant police helicopters flying overhead at night with searchlights shining through my bedroom window. There was one instance when the SWAT team wouldn't let me leave my apartment due to a suspect running around with a shotgun. Nevertheless, I felt safe and rarely locked my car doors. Story 34. In a town in the middle of Georgia, I realized that the Dukes of Hazzard wasn't fictional. It was a documentary. Story 35. When my parents moved to the United States, they were cautious about insurance companies, but they were still surprised by how often these companies would try to scam them. They learned the details of their healthcare and prepared to call their insurer to explain why a bill was incorrect or why a payment was the insurer's responsibility. My mom mentioned that she initially struggled with Kentucky accents. For a few months, she thought Pike County was Pack County until she couldn't find it on a map. Story 36. Since there are many technology companies in the United States, I thought it was very technologically advanced, but that is not the case. We had flat screens on buses abroad displaying advertisements 30 years ago, and the United States is just starting to implement them now. Story 37. Alaska here. People from the lower 48 states believe we live in two-story igloos, have pet penguins, and that our dogs are polar bears. It's a sad way of thinking. I just installed a satellite on my igloo. Story 38. My foreign friends who visit are curious if you can simply go shop for and buy guns. Yes, you can. Story 39. People often say that New Yorkers are rude. However, I have visited several times and always found them to be really nice. Once, while standing by the open door of a subway train, someone I had seen on the platform punched my arm just as the doors were closing. Almost the entire end of the carriage rushed over to check if I was okay and to assure me, "We're not all like that." For such a big city, it was truly touching, and I know from experience that there are many other places where the situation might have been less positive. Story 40. It is like what we see on television. We visited Los Angeles last year in August for the first time. Almost everyone we met was really nice and accommodating. Everywhere was super accessible for individuals with disabilities. We loved our time there and can't wait to return to explore more of your country. That is, of course, after the fascists are out of power. Story 41. I didn't believe that using my God-given legs for transportation would be seen as odd. I also didn't think that cycling would be impossible, but the roads there are among the most hostile places to be. Story 42. Americans are often portrayed as casual, friendly, and outgoing people in movies. This is true in real life as well. They are genuinely some of the nicest people I have ever met. Story 43. I used to think that black and white people lived completely intermingled. I didn't realize there were distinct black and white neighborhoods. Story 44. Not a big misconception. I have found Americans in general to be very kind, helpful, and friendly. I love visiting. I had a whole plan to travel through as many states as I could, camping for 2 to 3 months this summer. But that is no longer possible due to the political situation. Story 45. I work in New York City, and a few years ago, a family visiting from England came up to me on the street, apologetically asking for assistance. They said something like, "Excuse me, sir. I apologize for bothering you, but could you help me find something?" I replied, "No problem at all. You're not bothering me. Where are you trying to go?" They apologized again, and I laughed, saying, "It's no problem. I would ask for help too if I wasn't sure where to go. Hope you enjoy your trip." I mentioned this to a coworker who is originally from England, and she laughed, explaining that they assume Americans, especially New Yorkers, do not want to be bothered. I've seen people staring at a subway map, and a random person walking by asks, "Where are you trying to go?" Sure, some people can be rude, but that happens everywhere. Most of the time, people are friendly. Story 46. I was told there were white restaurants and bars and black restaurants by my dad. He was a union plumber and worked as a travel card several times in Detroit. I didn't believe him until I went on a business trip to North Carolina and asked the client how a certain barbecue restaurant was. He told me that they have their own restaurants and took me to a different barbecue restaurant. There was the largest Confederate flag I have ever seen on the wall. At that moment, everything clicked. Story 47. Just how big America is. Road trips in movies sounded fun but strange until you actually tried to drive from Arizona to Florida and discovered it is a multi-day trip of sitting in a car and looking out the window. This was before online mapping would have told us what to expect quickly and easily. Don't think parents actually looked at the scale of the map. Story 48. Most stereotypes were true. I was taken aback by how much influence the media has here, to an almost brainwashing degree. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.